I stood outside my parents' house, holding the last box of my things. They didn't hug me. They didn't even look at me. Just one sentence: come back when you're not a failure. That night, I slept in my car, broke, shaking, completely alone. But here's the twist. They thought I lost everything. They were wrong. I was just getting started. And the day they saw my bank account, everything changed. Would you forgive them, or disappear forever? I didn't go back inside after they closed the door. I just stood there, keys in my hand, listening to the silence they chose over me. A neighbor walked past and gave me that look, the one you give someone who just lost everything. I swallowed it down and got into my car, telling myself it was temporary. By morning, I was applying for jobs from a coffee shop that smelled like burnt hope. Days passed, then weeks. My calls home went straight to voicemail. When my brother finally picked up, he laughed. Still broke, he asked, like it was a joke. I didn't answer. I ended the call and opened my laptop again. Slowly, something shifted. Small freelance gigs turned into steady work, and steady work into real money. I learned to track every dollar, every risk, every decision. Months later, a client wired me more than I'd ever made in a single paycheck. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I remembered their faces that night. Not anger, clarity. They didn't lose me. They let me go. And now, they were about to see exactly who I became without them. I didn't rush to call them back. Instead, I built something bigger in silence. Each deal closed felt like rewriting the sentence they used to define me. One night, I logged into my account and saw the number sitting there, undeniable, irreversible. I smiled for the first time in months. Everything changed after that. My name is Elizabeth Carter. I'm 28, born and raised in a quiet suburb outside Chicago, the kind of place where people measure your worth by what you achieve before 30. For years, I fit perfectly into that expectation. I worked in corporate finance, long hours, sharp suits, clean numbers, everything predictable, everything controlled. You're the successful one, my mother used to say at every family dinner, her voice carrying just enough pride to make it sound like a title I had to defend. Naturally, I believed it too. I paid for holidays, covered unexpected bills, even helped my brother when his business failed. No one asked how I managed it. They simply assumed I always would. And I let them. It felt easier than explaining the pressure behind every paycheck. "You've got this, Liz," my father would add, tapping my shoulder like I was some kind of investment that never lost value. Still, something about that praise never felt steady. It rose and fell with my income, shifting subtly whenever I hesitated or said no. I noticed it, but I ignored it, convincing myself it was normal. After all, families support each other, right? Looking back, the signs were there long before everything collapsed. The respect I received wasn't unconditional. It was rented, tied to numbers on a screen. And the moment those numbers disappeared, so did the version of me they were willing to love. Once I began to see it clearly, I couldn't unsee it. Every conversation at home circled back to money, status, or someone else's success. "Did you hear about Mrs. Lang's daughter? She just bought a second house," my mother would say, glancing at me like it was a silent challenge. At first, I played along, smiling, nodding, keeping the image intact. But the pressure kept tightening, subtle at first, then constant. Whenever I hesitated to help financially, the tone shifted. "It's just temporary, right?" my brother would ask, though nothing had actually changed. My father stopped praising and started measuring. "You need to stay ahead," he told me one night, his voice low, almost like a warning. I laughed it off, but something about it stayed with me. The problem wasn't just expectation, it was dependency disguised as pride. The more I gave, the more it was expected. The more they expected, the less I could ever step back. And without realizing it, I had become the foundation they stood on. So when cracks finally appeared in my life, They didn't see a daughter struggling, they saw a system failing. And instead of holding it together, they prepared to replace it. That was the moment the conflict stopped being silent. It became inevitable, waiting for the exact second everything would break. Before everything started to crack, my life looked exactly like the version they were proud of. I woke up in a high-rise apartment overlooking the city, answered emails before sunrise, and stepped into an office where every decision carried weight. Numbers moved because I moved them. Deals closed because I stayed longer, pushed harder, refused to miss details others ignored. "You're on track for promotion," my manager told me once, sliding a report across the table. I remember nodding, already thinking about the next target. Outside of work, the image held just as steady. I wore confidence like part of my routine: clean lines, composed voice, controlled pace. When I walked into family gatherings, conversations shifted. "Ask Liz, she knows," my father would say, half joking, half serious. And I always answered, because that was my role. Of course, success came with a rhythm I learned to maintain. Long nights turned into habits, pressure turned into fuel. When my brother called asking for help with rent, I transferred the money without hesitation. "I'll pay you back," he said. I didn't ask when. When my parents wanted a vacation they couldn't afford, I booked it quietly, letting them believe it was easier than it was. On the surface, everything worked. The money flowed, the respect followed, and the story made sense. But beneath it, something was building, an invisible cost tied to every yes I gave. I didn't notice how dependent they had become. And more dangerously, I didn't notice how dependent I had become on staying successful. Because I kept showing up as that version of myself, my family treated me like I was the center of everything. It wasn't loud at first, more like a pattern that repeated often enough to feel normal. My mother would introduce me to her friends with a proud smile. "This is my daughter, Elizabeth. She works in finance," she'd say, emphasizing the last word like it carried status. I would nod politely, already knowing what came next: questions, admiration, quiet comparisons. At dinners, my seat somehow became fixed at the middle of the table. Conversations leaned toward me even when I tried to deflect them. "So, Liz, what do you think about investing right now?" my father would ask, even when the topic had nothing to do with money. And I answered, because it felt expected. Over time, the way they treated me shifted from appreciation to assumption. When bills came up, eyes turned in my direction before anyone spoke. "You've got it, right?" my brother would say casually, as if the answer had already been decided. If I hesitated, even slightly, the room changed. Not dramatically, just enough to notice. Still, I told myself it was harmless. Families rely on each other. That's what I believed. So I kept giving, kept showing up, kept reinforcing the role they had written for me. What I didn't realize was how carefully they tied their respect to what I could provide. It wasn't just gratitude anymore, it was expectation, quiet but constant. And as long as I could meet it, everything stayed smooth, almost too smooth to question. Even so, small cracks began to show in ways I couldn't ignore anymore. It started with subtle shifts, tones that lingered a second too long, glances exchanged when I said no. One evening, my brother brought up another, temporary, problem, this time a failed deal he needed help covering. I paused before answering, calculating my own limits for once. He noticed immediately. "What, you can't handle it?" he said, half smiling, but there was something sharper underneath. I brushed it off and transferred the money later that night, yet the moment stayed with me. After that, similar situations kept repeating, only slightly different each time. My mother began asking questions that sounded more like checks. "Work is still good, right?" she'd say casually, though her eyes searched for reassurance. When I responded vaguely, her expression tightened, just for a second. At first, I told myself I was overthinking. Pressure was normal. Expectations came with success. But the pattern kept building. The less certain I sounded, the more distant they became. Conversations shortened. Praise faded. One night, I tested it without meaning to. Things might slow down at work, I said, watching their reactions carefully. The room went quiet, not out of concern, but calculation. My father leaned back, arms crossed. "You should make sure that doesn't happen," he replied. In that moment, something clicked. Their support wasn't a safety net. It was conditional, fragile, and already starting to pull away. Not long after that conversation, the first real crack turned into something I couldn't control. It happened on a Tuesday morning, quiet and ordinary, the kind of day that never warns you before it changes everything. I was halfway through reviewing a report when my manager sent a message. "Can you come to conference room V?" No context, no urgency, just a line that felt too neutral to question, yet heavy enough to notice. When I walked in, HR was already there. That's when my stomach dropped. My manager avoided eye contact at first, shuffling papers that didn't need to be touched. Finally, he spoke. "Elizabeth, this isn't about your performance." I almost smiled because I knew what came next. "Companies don't say that unless they're about to remove you anyway." He continued, voice steady, rehearsed. "We're restructuring. Your position is being eliminated." The words landed clean, almost gentle, but they cut deeper than anything louder could. I sat there, hands folded, listening to details about severance, timelines, access being revoked by the end of the day. Practical things. Final things. "So that's it?" I asked quietly. He nodded, relieved I didn't argue. "I'm sorry," he added, though it sounded like a closing line, not an apology. I packed my desk in silence. No one looked directly at me as I left, just quick glances, like I had already disappeared. Outside, the city kept moving, unchanged, indifferent. I stood on the sidewalk longer than I should have, keys in my hand, replaying every decision that brought me here. And for the first time in years, I didn't have a plan. For a few minutes, I stayed on that sidewalk, trying to study my breathing before doing the one thing that had always worked. I reached for my phone. If there was ever a moment I needed my family, this was it. I called my mother first. It rang longer than usual before she picked up. "Liz? I'm a bit busy. What's going on?" Her tone was light, distracted. I lost my job," I said, forcing the words out before I could soften them. There was a pause, not the kind filled with concern, but calculation. "Oh," she replied, slower now. "Well, these things happen. You'll figure it out." I waited for more, for warmth, for reassurance, but it didn't come. So I tried again. "I might need a little time, just until I get back on my feet." Another pause. This one heavier. "You should have savings, Elizabeth," she said quietly. "You've always been responsible." The call ended soon after, polite but distant. I stared at the screen, then dialed my brother. He answered on the second ring. "What's up?" he asked. "I lost my job today." He let out a short laugh. "Seriously? That's rough." The words sounded sympathetic, but the tone didn't match. "So what's your plan?" "I'm working on it," I replied, already feeling the shift. "Yeah, you should," he said, his voice tightening. "You can't just depend on people." The line went quiet again. And in that silence, something settled in. I had reached out for support, but all I found was distance already forming. At first, I told myself they just needed time to process it. Losing a job wasn't small news, and maybe they didn't know how to respond yet. So I gave them space, a day, then two. But the silence didn't soften, it sharpened. Messages that once came easily stopped altogether. When I texted my mother, asking if I could come by for dinner, her reply came hours later. "This week isn't a good time." No explanation. No follow-up. I tried again with my father. "Can we talk?" I asked over the phone. He sighed before answering, a sound I had never heard directed at me before. There's not much to discuss, Elizabeth. You need to focus on fixing your situation. His voice was calm, but distant, like he had already stepped back. Each response carried the same underlying message. This was my problem now. The more I reached out, the more they pulled away. Even small things changed. My brother stopped sending casual messages. Family group chats continued without me being mentioned. It was subtle, but undeniable. Then came the moment that erased any doubt. I called my mother one evening, my voice tighter than I intended. Can I stay for a few days? Just until I figure things out. There was a pause, longer than any before. I don't think that's a good idea, she said quietly. I didn't respond right away. I couldn't. Because in that single sentence, everything shifted. It wasn't hesitation anymore. It was rejection, clear, final, and impossible to misinterpret. After that call, something in me refused to accept it as final, so I went to see them in person, telling myself it would be different face to face. The house looked exactly the same, lights warm, voices inside, like nothing had changed. I knocked once, then again. When my mother opened the door, her smile faded the moment she saw me standing there with a small bag in my hand. Liz, you should have called first, she said, stepping halfway outside, not inviting me in. I did, I replied, my voice tighter now. I just thought, maybe we could talk. Before she could answer, my father appeared behind her. He didn't even pretend to be surprised. We already discussed this, he said flatly. I'm not asking for much, I pushed, feeling everything rise at once. Just a few days. My brother's voice came from the living room, loud enough for me to hear. She always says that. I turned toward the sound, stunned. What does that mean? He stepped closer, arms crossed, expression cold. It means you had everything, Liz. And you lost it. That's on you. The words hit harder than I expected, but my father didn't stop him. Instead, he added quietly, you need to learn to stand on your own. I looked between them, waiting for someone to soften, to correct it, to remind me I still belonged there. No one did. Then my mother spoke again, softer but sharper. We can't keep carrying you. And in that moment, standing at the doorway of the place I once called home, I realized they didn't see me as family anymore. After that night, the distance between us didn't happen all at once. It unfolded slowly, in ways that were almost easy to ignore at first. I stopped going by the house, telling myself it was temporary, that things just needed time to settle. But the silence stretched longer than expected. Days turned into a quiet routine where my phone stayed still, no calls, no messages, nothing that suggested I was still part of their world. At one point, I tried reaching out again, something simple. Hey, how are things at home? I texted my mother. Hours later, a short reply came through. Everything's fine. No question back. No continuation. Just an end. Even the family group chat changed. Notifications still popped up, photos, jokes, updates, but I noticed something missing. No one tagged me anymore. No one asked where I was. It was like watching a conversation I used to belong to continue without me. Then came the moment that made it undeniable. My brother posted a picture from a family dinner I hadn't even known about. Everyone was there, smiling, relaxed, complete. I stared at the image longer than I should have, searching for any sign that something felt off. It didn't. I typed a message, then erased it. Because by then, it was clear. I wasn't being left out by accident. I was being removed, piece by piece, until there was nothing left to reconnect to. At some point, I stopped waiting for things to go back to normal, because there was no normal left to return to. The silence, the distance, the quiet removal, it all began to form a pattern I could finally understand. I replayed every moment in my head, every conversation, every glance that felt slightly off. None of it was sudden. It had been building long before I noticed. Sitting alone in my apartment one night, I said it out loud for the first time. They didn't love me, they needed me. The words felt sharp, almost unreal, but they fit too perfectly to ignore. Everything started to make sense. The praise, the attention, the way they relied on me, it was never about who I was. It was about what I provided. I remembered my brother's voice, casual but cutting. "You lost it. That's on you." At the time, it felt cruel. Now, it sounded honest. In his mind, my value had dropped the moment my income did. The realization didn't come with tears this time. It came with clarity. I wasn't grieving the loss of their support, I was facing the truth about it. And once I saw it clearly, something inside me shifted. If their respect was tied to my success, then losing everything didn't just expose my weakness, it exposed theirs. For the first time, I stopped asking why they changed, and started asking why I ever believed they wouldn't. Once that realization settled in, I tried to move on, to stay away, to stop chasing something that clearly wasn't there anymore. But then I saw the post. My brother had uploaded a photo, balloons, candles, a decorated table. Mom's birthday dinner, the caption read. Everyone was there. Everyone except me. I stared at the image, zooming in without thinking. My mother was smiling, relaxed, surrounded by the same people who had once expected me to be part of that moment. For a second, I told myself it was an oversight, maybe a last-minute plan. So I checked the date. It had been arranged days ago. Something tightened in my chest, not confusion this time, something sharper. I opened my messages, scrolling back. No invitation. No mention. Nothing. I grabbed my keys before I could overthink it. The drive felt longer than usual, every red light stretching the distance. By the time I pulled up to the house, I could already hear laughter spilling through the windows. It didn't sound like a place I didn't belong to. It sounded like a place that had decided I didn't. I stood outside for a moment, watching shadows move behind the curtains. Plates clinked, voices overlapped, familiar and distant at the same time. My hand hovered over the doorbell, hesitation creeping in. Then I pressed it. Because part of me still needed to see it for myself, to confirm that what I felt wasn't just in my head. And deep down, I already knew, this wasn't going to be a simple misunderstanding. The doorbell echoed longer than I expected, sharp against the noise inside. For a second, I almost stepped back, ready to leave before anyone answered. But then the door opened. My mother stood there, her smile still lingering from whatever had just been said behind her until she saw me. It disappeared instantly. "Liz, what are you doing here?" she asked, her voice low, controlled. I held up the small gift in my hand, something simple I had picked up on the way. "It's your birthday," I said, trying to keep my tone steady. "I thought I should be here." She hesitated, just long enough for me to notice. Then she stepped aside, but not fully. "We didn't expect you," she replied. "I can see that," I said quietly, walking past her anyway. The room fell silent the moment I entered. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Forks hovered above plates. My brother leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing slightly. "Well, look who showed up," he said, not bothering to hide the edge in his voice. I placed the gift on the table, ignoring the way everyone watched me like I didn't belong there. "I didn't realize I needed an invitation," I added, meeting his gaze. No one laughed. No one moved to greet me. And standing there, surrounded by familiar faces that suddenly felt distant, I understood something even clearer than before. This wasn't just a decision to show up. It was stepping directly into a place where I was no longer wanted. The moment I saw that photo, something in me refused to stay silent. I told myself I didn't care anymore, that I had already accepted the truth, but my hands were already reaching for my keys. Maybe it wasn't about being invited. Maybe it was about proving I still had a place there. The drive over felt automatic, like my body had decided before my mind could catch up. Streetlights blurred past, each one pulling me closer to a decision I couldn't undo. I kept replaying possibilities. Maybe they thought I was busy. Maybe it was a last-minute plan. The excuses sounded weaker with every mile. When I finally pulled up, I didn't turn off the engine right away. I just sat there, watching the house, lights glowing warmly as if nothing had changed. Laughter slipped through the walls again, familiar, almost comforting, until it wasn't. Just go, I whispered to myself. Or leave now. But I didn't leave. Instead, I grabbed the small gift from the passenger seat, my grip tightening around it as I stepped out. The air felt colder than it should have. Each step toward the door grew heavier, slower, like something inside me was resisting. Still, I kept moving. Because walking away would mean accepting their version of me, the one they had already erased. And I wasn't ready to disappear without being seen. For a brief second after I stepped inside, I thought maybe it wouldn't be as bad as I imagined. I placed the gift gently on the table, forcing a small smile. "Happy birthday, Mom," I said, hoping the simplicity of it might soften something. She glanced at the box, then back at me, her expression unreadable. "You didn't have to come," she replied, her tone polite but distant. Before I could answer, my brother let out a quiet laugh. "Yeah, especially uninvited," he added, loud enough for everyone to hear. A few relatives shifted in their seats, avoiding eye contact. No one interrupted him. "I didn't think I needed permission to see my own family," I said, my voice steady, though my chest tightened. "That depends," he shot back, leaning forward. "Are you here as family, or as someone looking for help again?" The words landed hard, sharper than anything before. I felt the room watching, waiting. My father set his glass down slowly. "This isn't the time for this," he said, but he didn't look at me, only at the situation, like I was the problem disrupting it. "I'm not asking for anything," I replied, but it sounded weaker than I wanted. My brother shrugged. "That's not how it usually goes." A quiet murmur moved through the table. Not disagreement, agreement, just softer. I looked at my mother again, searching for something, anything, but she only said, "We were having a peaceful evening." And in that moment, it hit harder than anything shouted. I wasn't just unwelcome. I was an interruption. I didn't stay much longer after that. No one asked me to leave, but no one asked me to stay either. I walked out quietly, the sound of laughter resuming behind me before the door fully closed. That was the last confirmation I needed. After that night, reality settled in fast. I moved into a small rented room on the edge of the city, the kind of place you don't picture yourself ending up in, but you accept because there's no other option. The walls were thin, the furniture mismatched, and the silence felt heavier than it should have. Every morning started the same way, checking my account, calculating how long I could last. I cut everything down to the minimum. No eating out, no unnecessary spending, no room for mistakes. Grocery trips became careful decisions. Do I really need this? I'd ask myself, standing in front of shelves I used to ignore. Sometimes, I put things back just to stretch one more day. At night, the quiet grew louder. I sat on the edge of the bed, laptop open, applying for jobs that rarely answered. "We've decided to move forward with other candidates." The same sentence over and over until it stopped surprising me. There were moments I almost reached for my phone again, almost called home. But I didn't. Because I already knew what was waiting on the other side, nothing. At first, I kept telling myself it was just a phase, something temporary I would push through like everything else. But the longer the silence stretched, the louder my own thoughts became. Nights were the worst. I would lie there staring at the ceiling, replaying every decision, every moment that led me here. What did I miss? I whispered once, the question hanging in the dark with no answer. During the day, I tried to stay functional, forcing routines that no longer felt real. But cracks kept breaking through. Doubt crept in quietly, then all at once. Maybe they were right. Maybe I had lost everything because I wasn't enough. The thought stayed longer than I wanted it to. One afternoon, I caught my reflection in the mirror and barely recognized the person staring back. No confidence, no certainty, just someone trying to hold it together. "This isn't you," I said under my breath, but it didn't feel convincing. The pressure built in waves. Some moments, I felt numb. Other times, anger surged unexpectedly, sharp and uncontrollable. I would clench my fists, then force myself to let go, sitting in silence again. But somewhere beneath all of it, something refused to fully break. It didn't feel like strength yet, more like resistance. A quiet voice pushing back against everything I was starting to believe. And even though I couldn't define it, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't done yet. That quiet resistance didn't stay quiet for long. Little by little, it started shaping the way I saw everything around me. One morning, instead of reaching for my phone or checking my messages, I just sat there and asked myself a different question. What if nothing is coming to save you? The thought felt harsh, but it also felt honest. At first, it stung. Then it settled. Because the more I repeated it, the clearer things became. I wasn't waiting for a response anymore. I was waiting for permission to feel okay, to move forward, to rebuild. And no one was going to give me that. I stood up, walked to the mirror again, and this time I didn't look away. "Then do it yourself," I said, my voice steadier than before. It wasn't confidence yet, but it wasn't doubt either. It was a decision. From that moment, small changes followed. I stopped checking my phone every hour. I stopped replaying conversations that no longer mattered. Instead, I opened my laptop with a different intention, not just to apply, but to learn, to build something on my own terms. The shift wasn't dramatic, but it was real. And for the first time since everything fell apart, I wasn't reacting anymore. I was choosing. That choice didn't feel powerful at first, but it stayed. It followed me into the next morning, and the one after that, until it became harder to ignore than the fear I had been living with. I sat at the edge of my bed, laptop open, staring at another rejection email. For a moment, the old voice returned. "You're not enough." I closed the screen. "No," I said out loud, sharper this time. "I'm not doing this again." The room felt different after that, like something had shifted in the air. I stood up, pacing once, then stopped in front of the window. The city outside hadn't changed, but I had. If no one was coming to fix this, then I had to stop waiting and start moving. So I made a decision, simple but absolute. I wouldn't call them again. Not for help, not for comfort, not for anything. That door was closed, and I wasn't going to stand outside it anymore. Instead, I turned back to my desk and opened a blank document. No job listings, no applications, just space. What can you actually do? I asked myself. The question felt uncomfortable, but necessary. I started listing skills, ideas, anything that could turn into something real. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't clear. But it was mine. And for the first time, the anger I had been holding onto didn't weigh me down. It pushed me forward. That decision didn't magically solve anything, but it gave me direction. The next morning, instead of waiting for replies that never came, I opened my laptop with a different focus. Start small, I told myself, even though every part of me wanted something immediate, something big enough to fix everything at once. I began with what I knew. Financial analysis, budgeting, consulting, skills I had once used inside a structured system now had to stand on their own. I signed up for freelance platforms, built a simple profile, and stared at the empty page longer than I expected. Who would even hire me? The doubt crept in again. I ignored it and wrote anyway. Short, direct, no exaggeration. Then I sent my first proposal. No reply. The second. Nothing. The third, still silence. Each rejection hit quietly, but they stacked fast. For a moment, I almost stopped. Instead, I adjusted. Changed the wording. Lowered the price. Sent more. Hours passed, then days. My routine shifted: wake up, search, send, repeat. It wasn't glamorous. It was survival. Then, one night, a notification popped up. We'd like to work with you. I read it twice, just to be sure. The job was small, barely worth mentioning before, but now it felt different. It was proof. Don't mess this up, I whispered to myself, sitting up straighter. I worked through the night, checking every detail, delivering more than asked. When the payment came through, it wasn't life-changing. But it changed something inside me. Because for the first time since everything collapsed, I wasn't falling anymore. I was building. That first payment didn't just validate the work, it forced me to rethink everything I believed about success. For so long, I had measured my value by stability, titles, and approval. Now, sitting alone in that small room, I realized none of those things had ever truly belonged to me. You built it for them, I said quietly, staring at the screen. The thought lingered, uncomfortable but necessary. If I had once shaped my life around expectations, then this time had to be different. I couldn't rebuild the same structure and expect a new result. So I started questioning every habit I carried forward. Why did I wait for permission? Why did I rely on validation before moving? Each answer led to the same conclusion: I had been trained to perform, not to own. That had to change. From then on, I approached everything differently. I stopped chasing perfection and focused on momentum instead. One small win became the next step, then another. When doubt appeared, I didn't fight it, I worked through it. Keep going, I'd say under my breath, even when it felt uncertain. The shift wasn't loud, but it was constant. And slowly, without realizing it, I stopped trying to return to who I used to be. Because I was becoming someone who no longer needed their approval to move forward. That shift in mindset didn't stay theoretical for long, it demanded action. I began structuring my days with a discipline I had never needed before. Mornings started early, not because I had to clock in, but because every hour now belonged to me. No excuses, I whispered once, setting my alarm even earlier the next day. Work filled every gap. If I wasn't completing a client task, I was learning something new: market trends, tools, strategies I had once ignored because they weren't required. Now, everything mattered. My laptop stayed open late into the night, the glow of the screen replacing any sense of rest. Meals became quick, almost forgettable. Time blurred. At first, the pace felt overwhelming. There were moments I leaned back, eyes burning, hands still, questioning if it was sustainable. But stopping wasn't an option anymore. Every completed project led to another opportunity, even if it was small. Keep stacking, I reminded myself, tracking each result like it meant everything, because it did. Gradually, something changed again. The exhaustion didn't disappear, but it transformed into focus. I noticed patterns, improved faster, worked sharper. Clients started responding quicker. Payments came more frequently. One night, I paused for the first time in hours, looking at the list of completed tasks. It wasn't impressive to anyone else. But to me, it was undeniable proof. I wasn't surviving anymore. I was outworking the version of me they had already given up on. As the work became consistent, the money slowly followed, not in huge amounts, but enough to create something I hadn't felt in months: control. I didn't spend it. I studied it. Every dollar had a purpose now. One night, staring at my account, I asked myself, are you just going to earn, or are you finally going to grow it? That question stayed. It pushed me back into something I understood, but had never fully owned: investing. I started small, almost cautiously, reviewing markets late at night, analyzing patterns the way I used to at work. Only this time, there was no safety net. No company behind me. Just my decisions. The first move felt heavier than it should have. My hand hovered over the screen longer than I expected. "If you lose this, it's on you," I muttered. Then I clicked anyway. Days passed. The numbers moved up, then down. Each shift pulled at my focus, testing my discipline. I wanted to react, to adjust too quickly, but I forced myself to stay still. "Trust the process," I repeated, even when doubt crept in. Then came the moment I didn't expect so soon. A small gain. Not dramatic, but real. I leaned back, exhaling slowly, watching the numbers settle. It wasn't luck. It was the result of every hour I had rebuilt from nothing. And just like that, I wasn't only working for money anymore. I was making it work for me. That small gain didn't fade like I expected. It multiplied, slowly at first, then with a rhythm I could finally understand. I didn't celebrate it. I studied it. Every win, no matter how minor, became data. Why did this work? I asked myself, replaying each decision instead of rushing forward blindly. At the same time, freelance work kept growing. One client referred another, then another. My inbox, once empty, started filling with real opportunities. "Are you available this week?" became a question I saw more often than rejection emails. I answered carefully, never overpromising, always delivering more than expected. The combination changed everything. Money no longer arrived unpredictably, it began to flow. Not in overwhelming amounts, but enough to stack, to build, to prove consistency. I tracked every dollar, watching patterns form across both income streams. One evening, I opened my account and paused. The number staring back at me was higher than anything I had seen since losing my job. I didn't react immediately. I just sat there, letting it settle. "You did this," I said quietly, almost not believing it. The room was still the same, small, quiet, unchanged. But the weight inside me had shifted completely. This wasn't survival anymore. It was momentum. And for the first time, I allowed myself to feel something I hadn't in months. Not relief, not even happiness. Control. That sense of control didn't stay contained for long, it pushed me to think bigger. What started as freelance work and small investments began to connect into something more structured. One night, while reviewing my client projects and tracking my returns, I noticed a pattern. Businesses weren't just hiring me for tasks, they needed strategy, systems, direction. I leaned back, staring at my notes. What if you stop working for them and start building something around this? The idea felt risky, but it also felt inevitable. So I tested it. I created a simple framework offering not just services, but full financial guidance for small businesses struggling to scale. The first few clients came from referrals. "Can you help us long-term?" one of them asked during a call. "Yes," I answered, even before I had everything figured out. That was the beginning. I built processes late into the night, turning scattered work into a system that could grow without me handling every detail. Slowly, I started outsourcing smaller tasks, keeping the core decisions for myself. It wasn't perfect, mistakes happened, delays too, but each problem forced me to refine the structure. Then the shift came faster. More clients. Bigger contracts. Conversations that used to feel out of reach became routine. One afternoon, I opened my dashboard and froze. The numbers weren't small anymore. They were scaling faster than anything I had done before. "This is real," I whispered, gripping the edge of my desk. Because for the first time, I wasn't just rebuilding my life. I was creating something that could outgrow it. That growth didn't go unnoticed. As the system expanded and results became consistent, conversations started shifting in a direction I hadn't planned for. One client, after reviewing the numbers, leaned forward during a call and asked, Have you ever considered scaling this with outside capital? The question stayed with me long after the meeting ended. At first, I resisted it. Taking investment meant giving up a level of control I had fought hard to rebuild. But the more I reviewed my projections, the clearer it became. There was a ceiling I couldn't break alone. So I prepared. Late nights turned into strategy sessions, refining my model, tightening every detail. When I finally sat across from potential investors, I wasn't pitching an idea, I was presenting proof. This isn't a concept, I said, sliding the data forward. It's already working. They didn't respond immediately. Questions came instead, sharp, precise, testing every assumption. I answered each one without hesitation, not because I was confident, but because I had lived every number they were challenging. Then, a few days later, the email arrived. Short. Direct. We'd like to move forward. I read it once. Then again. The number attached to it was larger than anything I had ever handled before. My hand tightened around the phone. Don't hesitate now, I whispered. Because this wasn't just validation anymore. This was expansion. That expansion changed the pace of everything. With the investment in place, growth accelerated beyond what I had prepared for. Systems scaled, clients multiplied, and decisions that once took days now happened in minutes. I adapted quickly because I had to. There was no room to hesitate anymore. At first, I avoided checking the total numbers. It wasn't fear, it was focus. I stayed locked into the process, tracking performance, managing risk, pushing forward. But one evening, after closing a major deal, I finally paused. I opened my account. The screen loaded slowly, almost deliberately. When the number appeared, I didn't react right away. I just stared at it, letting the reality settle in. It had crossed a line I once thought was far away. 7 digits. A million. I said quietly, the word unfamiliar in my own voice. It didn't feel like I imagined. No sudden rush, no overwhelming emotion. Just stillness. Then clarity. Every late night, every rejection, every moment I stood alone, it was all there, reflected in that number. I leaned back, exhaling slowly. Because this wasn't luck. It wasn't timing. It was the result of rebuilding everything from nothing. And in that moment, I understood something even more important than the money itself. No one could take this version of me away anymore. Success didn't stay hidden for long. As the business grew, my name started appearing in places I never expected: articles, small interviews, industry mentions. At first, I ignored it, treating it as background noise. But news has a way of traveling, especially when it carries numbers people recognize. It reached them quietly. I didn't hear it directly, not at first. It came through someone else, a distant relative who messaged me out of nowhere. "Is this really you?" they asked, attaching a link to an article featuring my company. I stared at the screen for a moment, then replied with a simple yes. That was all it took. A few days later, my phone lit up with a name I hadn't seen in months. My brother. I didn't answer immediately. I let it ring, watching it like it belonged to someone else. Then it stopped. A message followed. "Hey, heard you've been doing well." I read it twice. Not "how are you?" Not "are you okay?" Just that. Another message came, this time from my mother. "We should talk." I exhaled slowly, setting the phone down without replying. Because in those few words, I could already hear the shift, the tone they used when things were going right again. And for the first time, I wasn't the one reaching out. I didn't respond to their messages, but the next move didn't come from me, it came from an invitation. A formal email landed in my inbox a week later, subject line simple, but impossible to ignore: Annual Investment Summit, Keynote Speaker Confirmation. I read it once, then again, recognizing the venue immediately. It was one of the largest events in the city, the kind my family used to talk about like it was untouchable. I almost declined out of habit. Then I paused. No, I said quietly. You don't step back now. The day of the event arrived faster than expected. The building stood taller than I remembered, glass reflecting a version of me that didn't exist before. Inside, the atmosphere was sharp, voices layered over quiet ambition, suits moving with purpose. I adjusted my sleeve, steadying my breath as I walked through it. Then I saw the guest list. Names I recognized. Names that shouldn't have mattered, except a few stood out. My family had connections there. My brother's company, my father's old contacts. It clicked instantly. They would be here. For a moment, I stopped walking. Not out of fear, out of clarity. So this is how it happens, I murmured. I didn't turn back. Because this wasn't just another event anymore. It was a collision. Everything I had been, everything I became, meeting in the same room. And this time, I wasn't walking in as someone trying to belong. I was walking in as the one they would have to face. I ignored their messages, but I couldn't ignore what came next. The invitation wasn't just another opportunity, it was a stage. A formal confirmation email placed me as a keynote speaker at one of the most exclusive investment summits in the city. I recognized the venue instantly. My family used to admire events like this from a distance, speaking about them like they belonged to another world. For a moment, I hesitated. Not because I doubted myself, but because I understood exactly what this meant. If you walk in there, I murmured, there's no going back. The day arrived with a sharp clarity. The building rose above the skyline, glass reflecting movement and ambition. Inside, everything felt precise, measured conversations, controlled energy, people who knew exactly why they were there. I adjusted my jacket and stepped forward without slowing down. Then I saw them. Not directly at first, but in fragments, a familiar voice across the room, a posture I recognized instantly. My brother stood near a group of investors, confident, unaware. My father wasn't far behind, speaking to someone with the same calm authority I remembered. I didn't stop. Keep walking, I told myself, each step steady, deliberate. Because this wasn't coincidence. It was alignment. Every choice, every rejection, every late night had led here, to a room where the past and present would collide. And this time, I wasn't the one being judged. I was the one about to be introduced. The room dimmed slightly as the host stepped onto the stage, his voice cutting clean through the layered conversations. Ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker, he began, and something in the shift of attention pulled every eye forward. I stood just behind the curtain, hearing my name before I felt my feet move. Elizabeth Carter. For a fraction of a second, the world went silent. Then the lights found me. I stepped out. The reaction didn't come all at once, it unfolded. A pause. A ripple. Then recognition. I saw it hit them before they could hide it. My brother's expression froze mid-conversation, his confidence slipping in real time. My father turned slowly, confusion tightening into disbelief. No way, I heard someone whisper near them. I kept walking, each step measured, controlled. No hesitation, no rush. The same room that once would have intimidated me now felt smaller, manageable. Mine. When I reached the center of the stage, I didn't look at them immediately. I let the moment settle, let the silence stretch just long enough to be felt. Then I lifted my gaze. Our eyes met. That was enough. I didn't smile. I didn't react. I just held it long enough for them to understand. Then I turned to the audience, my voice steady. Thank you for being here. Applause followed, growing stronger, filling the space they once occupied in my mind. And in that moment, it wasn't about proving anything anymore. It was about showing them exactly who they had walked away from. As the applause settled into a steady rhythm, I let my gaze drift back across the room, not searching, not hesitating, just allowing it to land where it needed to. And there they were, no longer distant figures in my memory, but real, exposed, unable to look away. My brother tried to recover first, straightening his posture, forcing a half-smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Liz," he mouthed, barely audible from where he stood. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. My father's reaction was quieter, but heavier. He held my gaze for a moment, then looked down, adjusting his sleeve as if that small movement could steady him. It couldn't. The certainty he once carried was gone, replaced by something unfamiliar, uncertainty, maybe even regret. I took a step forward, not leaving the stage, just enough to shift the angle, to make sure there was no distance left to hide behind. "You always told me to stay ahead," I said calmly into the microphone, my voice carrying further than I intended. It wasn't directed at them, but it reached them anyway. No one else understood the weight of that sentence. They did. For a brief second, the room held its breath. And in that silence, everything we hadn't said before finally existed, clear and undeniable. I let that silence stretch just a moment longer before speaking again, not louder, but clearer, each word placed exactly where it needed to land. "I remember something else you said," I continued, my eyes still forward, though I could feel them listening. "You told me, if I couldn't stand on my own, I shouldn't come back." A faint shift moved through the room. Some leaned in, sensing the weight without knowing the story behind it. I took that seriously, I added, my voice steady, controlled. "I left. I didn't call. I didn't ask for help." A brief pause. Not because I didn't need it, but because I finally understood I wasn't going to get it. The words didn't rush. They settled, one by one. I turned my head slightly this time, just enough for them to know it was no longer indirect. "And now," I said, softer but sharper, "I can stand on my own." No anger. No raised voice. Just truth. Another pause followed, heavier than before. Then I finished, without hesitation. "But here's what changed." I let that line breathe, watching the shift in their expressions, the realization forming too late to hide. "I don't need to come back." The room stayed quiet for a fraction of a second, just enough. Then the applause returned, louder this time, rising around me like a wall they couldn't step through. And in that moment, nothing else needed to be said. The applause didn't reach them the same way it reached everyone else. While the room responded with energy, they stood still, caught in something far heavier than the moment itself. My brother was the first to break, but not with words. His expression tightened, the forced composure slipping completely. He looked around, as if searching for a way to recover, but there was none. The confidence he carried earlier was gone, replaced by something raw and exposed. My father didn't move at all. His eyes stayed on me, but the certainty behind them had collapsed. I could see it clearly, the shift from control to realization. He opened his mouth slightly, like he might say something, then stopped. Whatever he had prepared no longer fit this version of reality. Then my mother stepped forward, just a fraction, her voice barely audible over the fading applause. "Elizabeth, we didn't," she began, but the sentence never finished. I didn't respond. I didn't need to, because the truth had already done its work. Around them, people started whispering, glancing, connecting the pieces they had just witnessed. The story wasn't hidden anymore. It was unfolding in real time, and they were at the center of it. And standing there, watching everything they once held on to fall apart without a single word from me, I understood something fully. This wasn't revenge built on anger. It was consequence. The noise of the room continued behind me, but it no longer belonged to me. I stepped back from the microphone, offering a brief nod to the host, then turned without hesitation. No lingering, no second glance. My heels echoed softly against the polished floor as I walked off the stage, each step steady, controlled, final. Elizabeth, wait. The voice came from somewhere behind me, strained, unfamiliar in its urgency. I didn't stop. I didn't turn. Because there was nothing left to respond to. As I moved through the hallway, away from the lights and the crowd, the air felt quieter, clearer. The weight I had carried for so long, the need to explain, to be understood, to be accepted, was gone. Not because it had been resolved, but because it no longer mattered. I reached the exit and paused for a fraction of a second, my hand resting on the door. Not out of doubt, but acknowledgement. This was the moment everything truly closed. Then I pushed it open. Cool air met my face as I stepped outside, the city stretching ahead of me, unchanged yet completely different. And this time, as I walked forward, I didn't feel like I was leaving something behind. I felt like I was finally free. As I walked into the night, the quiet gave me space to finally hear my own thoughts without interruption. For so long, I had measured my worth through their approval, adjusting myself to fit expectations that were never truly mine. Now, with every step forward, that weight felt further away. I stopped for a moment under the streetlights, looking at the reflection in a dark window. "You made it," I said softly, not as a celebration, but as recognition. Not of the money, not of the success, but of the person I had become in the process. Because the truth was clearer than ever. Family isn't defined by who stays when you're strong. It's revealed by who stands beside you when you fall. And if they disappear in your lowest moments, then what you lost wasn't support, it was an illusion. I turned away from the reflection, no longer needing to question it. The journey had changed something deeper than circumstances. It had rebuilt my understanding of value, of independence, of what it means to belong. And as the city stretched ahead, alive with possibility, I didn't feel like I was proving anything anymore. I was simply living on my own terms, without waiting, without asking. Because the greatest form of closure isn't revenge. It's becoming someone who no longer needs it. And maybe that's where this story really turns back to you. Because it's easy to watch from the outside, to judge, to think you know what you would do. But when you're the one standing at that door, hearing it close, everything feels different. So let me ask you something honestly. If you were in my place, would you go back? Would you answer those messages, sit down with them, try to rebuild something that only existed when you were strong? Or would you walk away, like I did, and never look back? Take a second and really think about it. Not the version of you that wants to forgive, but the one who remembers how it felt in the worst moment. The silence. The rejection. The way people who should have stayed, didn't. Because choices like that don't come from logic alone. They come from what you're willing to accept, and what you're finally ready to leave behind. So, I want to hear from you. Would you forgive them? Or would you disappear and build a life they'll never be part of again? Comment your answer below, and don't just say it. Explain why.